Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today, and it's not into a final masterpiece.
No,
It's
no.
into a single document, maybe the most crucial document, that often dictates whether a creative vision ever even, sees the light of day.
The project proposal.
Exactly, the project proposal. And just to be clear, our mission here is not to give you a how-to guide on getting funded.
Hmm.
Our goal is to analyze the friction in this whole process,
Hmm.
the psychological cost of translating a pure internal idea into the fixed language that
Well, that systems demand.
it's where the vision meets the system. And what's so fascinating in these sources is that the proposal is framed as this critical threshold moment.
A threshold. I like that.
Yeah. Before this document, the work is all intuition, sketches, doubt. But once you commit it to paper, intuition just isn't enough anymore.
It stands between the idea and the exhibition.
It really does. It decides if the work is seen, funded, or just quietly dismissed.
So when does an idea become unavoidable then? It seems like it's that moment it needs something external. That's it. External validation. Funding, a residency, a gallery space.
And the proposal is the document you need for that transition. It forces you to go from, say, I feel this work, to the very concrete, this work will do X by Y date and cost Z amount.
Exactly. Before the proposal, the idea can be fluid, ambiguous, totally self-contained. But the core constraint is the work has to exist on paper
In a fixed format.
in a fixed codified format. It has to be translated into language, structure, and intention, all before it even physically exists. And that's a huge undertaking. You're promising something that's still so uncertain.
So this is all about translation, not the final execution of the art. It's what happens when that intuitive idea has to be formalized for someone else to read.
It is. The nature of the idea itself is immediately put to the test.
Because it has to appeal to external criteria now.
Precisely. It's no longer just about the artist's internal logic. It gets judged on value, relevance, urgency, all defined by the funding body or the institution.
And this deep dive is really about understanding that process. How do you convince someone else to invest in your internal landscape?
Yeah.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me and where the invisible work begins. The sources describe having to compress years of thinking, making, and doubting into a few pages.
That phrase is so powerful. It points to this massive, unseen intellectual labor.
The public never sees it.
Never. We absolutely need to acknowledge that invisible labor. It's the intense mental work of choosing every word, anticipating how a committee will read it, adapting your voice. It's often done late at night, under a ton of pressure.
And the sources really emphasize this tension. The proposal demands you be clear, convincing, and compliant without losing their soul.
And that last part is everything, isn't it?
It's the whole problem. What happens to the ambiguity, the complexity of that initial creative spark when it's forced into that institutional demand for clarity?
That is the ultimate friction point. Art thrives in complexity and what's left unsaid or open-ended.
Yeah.
But a grant proposal wants a simple linear narrative. So when you force intuition into that bureaucratic structure, when you have to put a timeline or a budget line on an abstract concept, something has to give.
Do the sources give us a sense of what that looks like in practice? Like, where does that friction show up?
It shows up everywhere. Take the budget. You have to submit a budget. How do you put a dollar amount on the hours spent just thinking?
You can't.
You can't just write, I'm going to spend the next 6 months thinking deeply. The institution wants concrete deliverables.
Yeah.
A number of photos, a specific length of film.
So that constraint is where dilution can happen. You end up promising the least risky, most quantifiable version of the project.
It's a dangerous balance. The structure itself almost determines the answer. You're solving the equation before you've even written the variables.
And this leads to a vital question the artist has to wrestle with, right? Is the work just simplified or diluted? Or, conversely, does the act of writing that proposal actually sharpen the intention?
Exactly. Does it force you to confront gaps in your thinking you might have ignored in the studio?
It could be painful, but maybe necessary. Okay, let's shift to the nature of the submission itself. The sources argue the proposal is anything but neutral. It's an act of deep exposure.
Huge exposure. The vulnerability of submitting something that isn't fully baked yet is just immense.
You're putting your unfinished thinking into fixed language that will be judged.
It's like turning in your raw notes for a public review.
And you're facing these fundamental questions while you're writing. What do I explain? What do I need to protect? as my own creative space.
And how much of yourself, your real risky idea, can you afford to expose on paper before it gets misunderstood or just rejected?
And this is where we have to talk about the institutional constraint, because you're not just writing to a person.
No, you're writing to a system with frameworks that were never designed for ambiguity. They're designed for accountability, fiscal responsibility.
And we see this so clearly in the context the artist shared. They're applying for subsidies, specifically mentioning the Mondrian Fonds.
A major national Dutch arts funder. And that context isn't just a detail, it sets the stage.
It really does.
The Mondrian Fonds has a very high, rigorous standard. Applying to a body like that means extreme compliance with formal formats. It demands complex justifications for everything. That rigor directly challenges creative ambiguity.
So the power dynamics are set from the start. The institutions hold the purse strings, the exhibition slots. They define what's valuable, what's relevant, what has urgency.
And the crucial takeaway is that the strategic language you use in the proposal starts to influence the work itself before it's even made.
You start writing the work you think they want to read.
Yes. There's this tension between that initial artistic freedom and the compliant language you need for professional survival.
Let's look at that subtle but profound shift in ownership that happens. At what point does the work stop belonging entirely to the artist and start being read through the proposal?
Well, once the proposal is accepted and funded, it becomes a kind of contract, a filter.
A filter, yeah.
Curators, committee members, the public. They're now seeing the idea through the strategic language you use to get the funding. The proposal doesn't just describe the work, it preconditions how people see it.
And the stakes are so high. We know this artist has a history of exhibiting at major venues. Art Rotterdam, Cannes Short Film Corner, a Louvre finalist. You can't afford to submit a purely intuitive document to get to that level.
That necessity leads us directly to this concept of anticipatory compliance.
Unpack that for us. What does that look like in practice?
It means the artist starts altering creative decisions, maybe subtly, based on anticipating how they'll be judged. You're negotiating the system before the system has even responded.
So if you know a funder favors, say, socially engaged projects,
you might reframe your purely aesthetic work to highlight its community impact, even if that wasn't the original point. It's a tactical maneuver.
A necessary one for survival within the cultural infrastructure. It sort of challenges that romantic idea of the pure, autonomous artist.
It forces the artist to be a strategist, not just a creator. It's the cost of admission. The work is now owned, in part, by its own administrative description.
And you have to keep this grounded in the present. The source material is so clear that this is happening right now. This series is being recorded in real time during applications and rejections.
Yes, this proposal is active. Its consequences are totally unknown.
That real-time element is key. It stops us from talking about this like it's a solved puzzle.
It reinforces the proposal as an act of negotiation, something that's constantly being revised and resubmitted.
And that negotiation boils down to vision versus system.
Risk versus readability.
Honesty versus survival. That's really the cost of putting your soul on paper.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, the series itself is documenting how artistic careers are sustained today. It's not through stability, it's through persistence, through this constant recalibration. This isn't a one-time chore, it defines the work.
So we've explored the proposal not as a checklist, but as this high-stakes act of translation under pressure. The cost of putting that vision on paper is the vulnerability, the friction needed to frame the chaos of creation into an ordered, fundable narrative.
And this raises a really important question for you, the listener, to think about. Let's say the proposal is submitted. The negotiation is underway. Let's assume the work gets funded.
Okay.
What is the next layer of risk that arises once the work is codified, assessed, and financially supported?
Meaning?
Well, the proposal frames the work and gets the money based on a set of promises. What happens if the actual artistic process takes an unexpected, more insightful turn? If the finished piece defies the very description that gave it life, does the artist have a duty to stick to the original funded vision? Or does the work, once it's defined and approved, ever truly escape the language used to justify its own existence?
That's a compelling question. That tension between the promise you made and the work you actually create, that's a fascinating new layer of risk. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into what happens when the beautiful chaos of creation meets the cold, hard structure of the application form. We'll get into those next risks in the next deep dive.